Hello, good morning and welcome to Racing News here on At the Races. Big story in the news yesterday. The BHA announced what's been described as a zero-tolerance policy on anabolic steroids. This follows a lengthy consultation process that the BHA has been involved with. And I'm pleased to say that BHA boss Paul Bittar is on the line right now to discuss this in a bit more detail with us. Welcome aboard, Paul. Thanks for your time and congratulations, first of all. A lot of work's gone into this, clearly, and so far, very positive response.
Thanks, Sean. Yes, it certainly has been a lot of work. Obviously we had the challenges of early last year, and subsequent to those cases, we enabled us to sort of raise with the IFHA and other international jurisdictions the need to kind of lift the bar. And then we undertook a pretty significant piece of work ourselves in the back half of last year and early this year, reaching the point of announcing the policy yesterday.
Yep, and as I say, generally a good reaction to it. Lots of people, I'm sure, will welcome the initiative. Let's have a chat about how it will work in practice. You've talked, Paul, about a twofold deterrence. We know that trainers have always faced very, very big bans, obviously, but now the horse itself can be excluded for a much longer period. So that increases the deterrence, provided, of course, that you're likely to get caught. And so for the deterrence to work, you have to fear getting caught. How much more testing is now going to be done?
Well, actually, that change, Sean, came in from the 1st of January this year, where we, off the back of the challenges last year, we did realise that the amount of testing that we were doing, primarily due to budget cuts at a BHA level over the sort of preceding 3 or 4 years, had led us to a point where we were a bit lower than we wanted to be. So from the start of January this year, 2014, we actually have increased our testing across the board by more than 20%, almost 25%. Now out of competition testing is up about 50%. So the changes that we announced yesterday won't actually have a significant impact on the amount of testing from 2015 onwards, because we actually lifted that already in 2014.
Yeah, I take the point it's already increased, Paul, and that it sounds a substantial increase, 20 or 25%, 50% out of testing. But of course, that fear of getting caught wasn't enough, as we know, to dissuade Mohamed Al-Zarouni, Gerard Butler, arguably, Howard Johnson going back several years, because presumably the fear of getting caught wasn't that great because the chances of being tested were slim. That's still the case, isn't it?
Well, slim in the sense of, if you look at the total numbers, I guess our balance is about what is a reasonable amount for the sport to commit in terms of resource. And we look at that both on an intelligence basis and also a random basis. And certainly for out-of-competition testing, unsurprisingly, there's a higher proportion that is based on intelligence-led testing. And that was a good example in the Mohamed Al-Zarouni case. As I said yesterday, you don't walk into one of the biggest stables in the world, test 45 horses and get 11 positives unless your intelligence systems and your regulatory systems are working. So are trainers fearful of being caught? I would expect that if you're getting bans, in the order of 6 to 10 years, that should be a sufficient deterrent. And certainly, with the level of testing that we're now doing and the penalties that are in place, I would think that trainers, that are undertaking these sorts of, treatments should be fearful of what the repercussions will be.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned intelligence-led investigations. That relies on somebody tipping you the nod, a bit of whistleblowing potentially. I may have missed it, but is there anything in here that makes that easier or clearer? Stable staff are going to be your main resource in that respect. It's a very difficult thing, isn't it, to blow the whistle. Have you done anything to make that easier?
Well, we've got a number of channels in terms of how that works. As you say, quite often that's from inside a stable, but quite often it comes from outside of the stable. We have a number of intelligence systems, and our intelligence system is actually built off a police-type intelligence system. And I've got to say that in terms of racing jurisdictions, it's without question the kind of leading intelligence system that I've seen internationally. We also have a call line that people can contact, and we do get a number of items that get fed into that, and we build up intelligence. But it's not just from inside information in terms of being inside the stable.
You talked about the international scene there, Paul, and I know one of the objectives is to move towards more international harmonisation. But unless I'm missing something, we're no closer, are we, to preventing horses coming to race in Britain from countries with lax anabolic steroid rules or no anabolic steroid rules? There's nothing to stop them crawling off the back of a horse box here looking like a cross between Mike Tyson and Godzilla and running against our clean horses, is there? That can't be right.
Well, I take your point to an extent, Sean. Look, I think, interestingly and unsurprisingly, I guess, a lot of the focus in the commentary and editorial about, since we released the policy yesterday, has been around international participation and the focus on international jurisdictions, and obviously in particular the US. I think that what we're saying is that, and you've seen over the last 12 months, jurisdictions like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Dubai, all lift the bar in terms of their sort of prohibition and deterrence related to the use of anabolic steroids. So I think that what you will see is you will increasingly see the position in the US become a very isolated position. A number of key jurisdictions, in particular Britain, Australia and Hong Kong, are really recognising the global brand risk to racing from the damage that the use of anabolic steroids can do. And if that means that ultimately the US become more isolated and jurisdictions have to consider whether participation from jurisdictions where anabolic steroid policies are lax, whether that participation should continue, I think that that's ultimately a decision that, jurisdictions like Britain, Hong Kong and Australia will have to make.
It seems like you're keen, and this has been discussed before, to take a lead, and I take your point about perhaps a growing momentum internationally to get behind where you're headed with this. With that in mind, Paul, the increased harmonisation with your colleagues overseas, lack of reciprocation with the WITC over the Dwyer case in India, lack of reciprocation with the UAE over Pat Cosgrave, is that consistent?
Well, it is if you look at those two individual cases, because the basis of reciprocation is about ensuring that someone has there's a fair set of procedures and that they get a fair hearing. It's not necessarily about immediately reciprocating the penalty. It is done. The immediate reciprocation of the penalty is on the basis that the treatment they got in the overseas jurisdiction is fair. And ultimately, in both of those cases, our disciplinary panel, which is independent of BHA executives, our disciplinary panel or appeal panel found that the procedures in each of those two jurisdictions weren't fair and that the penalties shouldn't be reciprocated. I would say, Sean, that our starting point is always that we look to reciprocate the penalties of all of the jurisdictions that are signed up to that international article. But ultimately, the licensees have the opportunity to put forward a case if they believe that the procedures in those jurisdictions weren't fair and they didn't get a fair hearing. The disciplinary panel in both those cases found that to be the case, and as a result, didn't reciprocate the penalty.
Many thanks for your time today, Paul. Really appreciate you coming on. I know you've got a busy schedule. Thanks for your time.
No, pleasure, Sean. Anytime. Thank you.
Paul Bittar, Chief Executive of the British Horse Racing Authority. And zero tolerance the way forward there. Some of those key points, just to confirm: no administration of steroids at any point, no exceptions. If a horse is found to have been administered with steroids, 14 months rather than the previous 6, and testing at any time, that's a really big factor, not just in racecourses, not just in trainers' yards, but anywhere where they can go and get hold of the horse. They can test it any time from registration. That registration will take place earlier, within 12 months of the horse being foaled, which will be reduced